guys, this is GamerCow. What's another Pokemon trading card game history video. Apologies if this one's a little on the quieter side. Having to record this late at night because roadworks are causing it to be impossible to record during the day. Lost Origin is a very complicated set to play. There's another reason we haven't done one of these in a while is because we've been spending more time practicing this one. Between that and real life things, it's kind of hard to get this one done because Lost Box as a deck is something that we did not have experience with as we were busy playing the old game when this came out. So yeah, playing the original stuff and didn't get a chance to do this. For anyone who doesn't know what the Lost Zone is as a concept here, because it only ever comes around for like one set every generation and a half or whatever, it is a banishment pile. If you consider Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there's like the discard pile, the graveyard, and then the banishment as it's called now, the remove from play area, that's what we are dealing with the Lost Zone. But unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! We can never get those cards back. There has never been, and at least in this implementation, there never isn't a way of recovering cards out of the Lost Zone. They truly are lost. That's the idea. So when you see a card like this, the Shiftery, that puts itself into the Lost Zone, you're never getting that Shiftery back. Most of the cards, with one exception, in this iteration of the Lost Zone are involved with placing your own cards there, and there is actually an archetype entirely built around that which has a lot of decision points to play. That's the thing. But say Delphox over here, you put 2 energy from it into the Lost Zone. The Aerodactyl, you put 3 cards in the top of your deck into the Lost Zone. There's like 2 cards that can put the opponent's cards into the Lost Zone, like Stonejourner and Lost City. We'll get into those as we do. It's a pretty big set. There's like 253 or something cards in here, and there are a few promos that came out during this time as well. A couple of these are worth honorable mentions, so we will discuss those as we do. But lots of character art stuff for previous sets as well, including like Gardenia with a rose right here. This one's kind of cute, but card's not good, but the art's pretty nice. And of course gold rares for stuff like Pikachu and Mew, because why not? Might as well, right? At least Adventurous Discovery gets a full art here. That's actually kind of a nice one. It does see some play now and again. So, I have a big old pile of stuff over here for various parts. I want to go over the archetypes from this set first, or like the major stuff, and then go over the trainers that are good, the Pokemon that are good, stuff that's like off meta that you might see or have some fun with, and then the honorable mentions down the bottom over here. We'll see why these are connected later on, but for now, let's go over our main stuff here. Every set in the last like 5 of the Sword and Shield era have got a Monster of the Week in them. These are like your big Pokemon Vs, etc. like the Mew VMAX, Arceus V-Star, Palkia. This one is Giratina, and both parts of this are actually important. Giratina V is a Dragon-type Pokemon, so it has no weakness or resistance. That makes it very difficult to counter outright. It has 220 HP going into 280, so it's on the bulkier side of the Pokemon V-Star. And both sides have got a 2 energy retreat. You might see in Arceus builds at least, you could see Air Balloon in this deck, so that's pretty useful. All 4 attacks are actually pretty good between this thing. Abyss Seeking for 1 colorless energy looks at the top 4 cards of your deck, puts 2 of them into the hand, the other 2 go to the Lost Zone. We'll see for especially Lost Box versions of that, when we talk about this lot, you'll see that putting into the Lost Zone is actually a really good thing, so that's completely fine. For 1 grass, 1 psychic and a colorless energy, Shred does 160 and pushes through all effects on the opponent's Pokemon. So the main use for this is that in the Arceus version of this deck, you have a way of beating Miltank, because you don't have single price attackers in that one, but you can just punch straight through the Miracle Body using Shred. Always an annoying attack to have around. It just gives these decks inbuilt counters to the stuff that's supposed to check them, but you know, Mew's another example with its Max Miracle. It's a very irritating thing to have. The V-Star has an attack and a V-Star power attack. Lost Impact for the same Grass Psychic Colors cost does 280 damage. Then you put 2 energy from any of your Pokemon into the Lost Zone. Usually at least one's going to be from the Giratina, but if you don't think it's going to get KO'd in the following turn, you can use spare energy on the bench as well, which is very irritating, to be honest. As you can see, 280 KOs V-Star Pokemon without needing a choice belt. So it just already does the numbers that it needs to do. It's kind of ridiculous. But if that's somehow not enough, if the opponent is using like a bulky VMAX that isn't just Mew that you could choice belt around, Star Requiem, once per game, can automatically KO the opponent's active Pokemon for a Grass and a Psychic Energy. No discard required, but you have to have at least 10 cards in the Lost Zone for that to trigger. And that transitions very nicely into the Lost Zone, the Lost Box archetype that we have here. This is focusing mostly on 2 cards that generate cards in the Lost Zone, which then power up cards which require a certain amount of cards in said Lost Zone. The Giratina, of course, is one. The way that we get them in there is using Comfey. This is only the second ever Comfey card. It's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. You look at the top 2 cards of your deck. If this is in the active spot, you put one to the Lost Zone, the other one goes into the hat. This is where the complication of this deck comes in, because there's a lot of decisions, a lot of planning that has to go into playing this well, and so we had to take a couple of sessions to practice that before we can demonstrate the decks on the weekend there. So yeah, difficult deck to play because of stuff like this. Sometimes you're going to have very hard decisions as to what to keep and what to ditch. It's not quite the same as like a Pidgeotto from before, where you just bottom deck the other card. You have to remove it permanently, so yeah. Chorus's Experiment is the other main card that will put stuff in the Lost Zone. This fantastic supporter card, I love this one, because it emulates Hapu, really. You look at the top 5 cards instead of the top 6, but you get to keep 3 of them. 2 cards go into the Lost Zone, so very, very strong. It lets you obviously tutor, lets you dig a little bit further into the deck than and you don't have to give up your hand like you would with a Research. This is a very aggressive style of card, which I definitely approve of. And yeah, you get to further your goals with the Lost Zone. So what are we doing with said Lost Zone? Well, the threshold is 4, 7, and 10 cards respectively. At 4 cards, this Cramorant over here, 110 HP basic, can use its attack without paying for the energy cost. The energy cost would normally be 2 water and a colorless to do 110. Damage is not affected by weakness, can KO itself, so it's pretty funny in the mirror. But this is a 0 energy, do 110, and you can do this as quick as the first turn. So the deck's got a really good early pressure game without even needing to spend energy, which is pretty insane, to be honest with you. Mirage Gate at 7 cards is an absolutely unbelievable item that this is what causes Lost Box to be a box style deck. Search your deck for up to 2 basic energy of different types and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Holy! So, most Lost Box decks will actually play 3 or even 4 or 5 different energy types depending on what they're trying to do. And the reason they get away with it is because of this card. You need at least 2 different types of energy in the deck. This works very well with dragons, of course. That's why Giratina does its Lost Zone stuff itself. And yeah, it can be played with dragon stuff, it can be played with regular things too, like Radiant Greninja works really well with this because you get to accelerate the water out the deck, and it has 1 colorless in its cost. So use one of these, accelerate water plus say, I don't know, lightning energy or psychic, just spitballing, and then attach the other water from hand. There you go, you've got your Moonlight Shuriken in 1 turn from one of these plus an attach from hand. Absolutely ridiculous. Also doesn't have a once per turn clause on it, so it's kind of like Beast Ring in that way, but you actually get this going by making your normal plays as opposed to forcing the opponent to be on a certain amount of prize cards. Extremely powerful card, and really just kind of does it all. If you get to 10 cards in the Lost Zone, this is where Sableye comes in, and most people will have a pretty big hatred of this card, at least until Jirachi got printed way into Scarlet Violet. For 1 Psychic Energy, Lost Mine lets you put 12 damage counters on the opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Absolutely ridiculous for a single prize card. However, you do need to have those 10 cards in the Lost Zone to make this work. That's usually not a problem. By about turn 3 or 4 you can very often get there, so from then on you can just like pick apart the opponent's board as you need to. 12 damage counters is enough to KO beat rolls, so you can dump the draw engine of many of these decks. It's also enough to KO 2 60 HP basics if the opponent hasn't managed to get stuff away yet, which is super huge. It's really big that Comfey's got 70 HP, because if it didn't, it would be very vulnerable in the mirror match to getting dunked on by this. Manaphy as well, if it had 60 HP like the old Mew did, would be in a lot more trouble. As it stands, it's still incredibly powerful, and we don't get a way of stopping the damage counters on this for quite a while. Big Parasol actually sees quite a bit of play solely because of this card, but even that can get checked fairly easily, so it's tough. It's a really good card. The fourth fun archetype in this one is the so-called Swim Freely archetype. This has an energy accelerant Infineon. It's the only reason to even talk about this stuff. If it is in play, you can attach a water energy from your hand to one of your Swim Freely Pokemon, the one that has that attack, as often as you like during your turn. So this lets you accelerate currently to 3 different Pokemon, but this actually sees a little bit of support even as recently, I think, as Twilight Masquerade, or maybe it's in Shrouded Fable. There's a Seeking that comes out very recently for that. Swim Freely as an attack is just water for 10, and if you flip heads it's agility, so nothing too fancy. But yeah, what we're powering up is Luminion to do Waterfall for 120, not really super good, but it is levelable searchable, so I guess there's that. Evolving from Infineon is kind of nice. There's a Seadra that for every water that's attached to it lets you snipe 20 cumulative on one of your opponent's Pokemon, so you choose one and say if you've got 5 energy, snipe 100. Not very efficient per se, but definitely quite potent. But realistically we're using Dugong here. This thing for 2 colorless energy lets you return any number of water energy on your Pokemon to the deck, and for each one that you returned, you do 40 damage. So it's very similar to the Rapid Strike Malamar, where instead of showing Pokemon in the hand, you are trying to amass a ton of energy in play and doing it that way. You could just use this with the Frostmoth from all the way back in Sword Shield base, but Frostmoth is a stage 1 and it can only attach to the bench, so it could be a little bit tricky to keep enough energy in play with that. This, at least with the little guy down here, the Infineon, is much easier to maintain, because you only have to bench Infineon. You could do that with Battle VIP Pass in turn 1. One huge problem with this deck is that the basic Pokemon do not have Swim Freely. So you do want a ton of energy. You need like 7 or 8 to do most of the stuff you want. 7 gets to V-Stars, 8 gets to most V-Maxes that you would see play, but even then, you need 9 to KO all of them. So it's a lot of commitment, a lot of card draw as well. It just seems a bit impractical. But hey, Rapid Strike Malamar saw a little bit of play, so if you want some fun, have a crack at that. Let's have a look at the trainers from this set then. Arcphone lets you look at the top card of your deck, and you can switch that card with one of your face down prizes. You don't really get to know where your prizes are very much within stuff at the moment, because they all get shuffled every time you do effects, but you can, say, use Hisuian Heavy Ball to know what the prizes are, and at least you can take a stab at getting one that way if you want to. And this way round, you know actually what one of your prize cards is now, so that can be kind of cool. Damage Pump is part of the Hisuian Zoroark archetype that we'll get to near the end of the main section here. You move up to 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to your other Pokemon in any way that you like. Seems kind of useless, and most decks will find it useless, but specifically, we actually talk about it just now because it's 3 cards in here alongside Gapejaw Bog that was in the previous set that we can mention. Gengar, if it's in the discard pile, lets you put it onto the bench and put 3 damage counters onto it. These are the counters that you'll then move with Damage Pump in order to attack with the Zoroark, which the V-Star is the main thing. We'll just very briefly touch the Pokemon V here because for no energy, it can do 30 damage and switch to the bench. So if you go in second, this is a good attack to put Diancie into the active and prevent the opponent from bossing up your vulnerable Pokemon V. but the V-Star for the double turbo energy does 50 for each of your Pokemon in play that has damage counters on them. So it would do 300 or 280 if you put double turbo down in it. That's what you're normally going to hit for, but 280 is exactly what you need to hit in order to KO Pokemon V-Star. With a choice belt, it KOs Mew, and that is most of the decks that you are going to go against. Anything else can get chipped down potentially by Gatejaw Bog being in play, which when you bench a Pokemon it does 2 damage counters to that Pokemon if you bench it from hand. And that's how you get additional damage counters down as well. So if you get 1 counter on all of your Pokemon, 300 damage. Kind of absurd. Phantom Star is also a really good V-Star power here. It is Professor's Research. Once per game, discard your hand, draw 7 cards. You only play 4 double turbo energy most of the time as your only energy source, so this can very often help you get to that energy and get you aggressively attacking on turn 2. Very powerful archetype. Sai is going to be representing this one. Didn't see that much tournament success, unfortunately. I don't think people cracked the deck properly, but it's a very cool one nonetheless, so definitely happy about seeing that. Lost Vacuum, didn't see a ton of representation in most Lost Box decks to begin with, but there is a turbo style that you can do with this card in order to facilitate like getting to 10 cards in the Lost Zone much faster. You have to Lost Zone another card in your hand to play this, but you choose a tool or a stadium card that's in play, yours or your opponent's, and Lost Zone it. So in most situations, because this does see play outside of Lost Box as well, in most situations this is being used to remove, say, an air balloon or a, say, Bravery Charm as it would be in Gen 9, Cape of Toughness in the current game. You would remove those so that you can get easier KOs on Pokemon, but in the Lost Box deck itself, you actually tend to Lost Zone your own stadium. The turbo builds will play Pokestop in order to try and get additional items into their hand, like this one, and by doing that, they don't want to give their opponent Pokestop as well, because it's usually a very strong card in a lot of decks nowadays. So in order to not do that, they will Lost Zone it with this card, and that puts 2 of their own cards into the Lost Zone for basically nothing, which is really strong. So yeah, cool card to have around. Toolbox probably should have been in honorable mentions, but it's very funny for the Rotom deck specifically, so I guess I could talk about that as we go now. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and any number of tool cards that you find there get put into the hand. The rest go back into the deck. The combination this has is alongside the Rotom B here, which this gets used outside of this, but we'll talk about the attack for now. Scrap Short for 2 lightning energy puts any number of tool cards from your discard pile into the Lost Zone and do 40 plus 40 for each one that you discarded. The idea is that you'll then play this alongside stuff like Research, so you take the tools from the deck using Toolbox, Research can discard them, and you can then go ahead and use a Scrap Short and do a ton of damage. This gets a Pokemon V-Star in the next set, which bumps its HP to 260 and its damage to 40 higher, so I will most likely be playing this next round to use the stuff. But it's pretty funny now anyway, and once you'd see like there's a limited amount of stuff that you can do with the tools because, well, you Lost Zone them and then you never get them back. This Porygon 2 down here for a single energy does 20 damage for each tool that's in the Lost Zone, both yours and the opponent's, so Lost Vacuum could technically get some extra use out of this, which is pretty fun. But yeah, you have one of these to finish off the game, and it's very silly because you Lost Zone like 12 tools or something, or 14 tools I guess it would be, to do 280 damage. Very, very silly. The main tools that you would use with this are the single strike ones, because they allow you to use Tower of Darkness, which can discard a single strike card, draw 2 cards. That includes the scrolls that are tool cards, so you can get them with this and go from there. What this actually sees play for in more modern situations is instant charge. Once during your turn you can draw 3 cards, and if you do, end your turn. Control decks tend to use that the most, but even Charizard has been known to use this in the early game because of a particular tool card that comes out in the next set, so we'll save that for later, but it's a very useful card outside of this, just let that be known. Eraser, very good Gym Leader Challenge card, unfortunately not particularly good for the main game. Searches your deck for up to 3 evolutions that do not have a rule box and put them into the hand. Yeah, it means you can't get V-Stars and stuff, obviously, that's the main limiting factor, but honestly, it's just too slow, right? Like, search your deck for Pokemon this way has not been particularly strong for any of Generation 8. This one I don't think would be strong even if the turn 1 supporter rule was reverted because of the fact that it's evolutions only. So yeah, a little bit of a shame on this one. It's got a very good full art though. Fantina was seen in a few early Lost Box Goodra builds, which is not the one that we're going to be seeing. We're going to be seeing Arceus Goodra in the main set. But people theorize this because of the fact that Goodra lowers damage that it takes. This further lowers damage. During your next turn, all of your Pokemon take 120 less damage from the opponent's V's attacks. The catch is that you have to have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone in order to play this card, and whilst that isn't necessarily a problem for Sableye, it is a problem for your supporter, because it means you're not using Chorus in order to get the cards in the Lost Zone in the first place, and it ends up just being a little bit too tricky, a little bit too win more sort of thing, and it doesn't even work in every matchup, so you don't want to play that many of them. Just not strong enough in the end, unfortunately. Speaking of Fortune, Misfortune Sisters is a very dumb control card. I don't like this one, but whatever. You look at the top 5 cards of the opponent's deck and discard any number of item cards you find there. The opponent then shuffles the rest of the cards back into their deck. They never get to see what those cards are. So yeah, it's just irritating. This is one of the cards that stall decks use with the block Snorlax in order to actually win the game because they try and mill the opponent out. Just irritating, to be honest, alongside all the other stuff like Silene, etc. to recover these things. It's a silly card. Fortin even, is anything but silly, however. Well, I don't know, depends on your take. You choose a basic Pokemon in your discard pile, switch it with one of your basic Pokemon in play. So it's Ninja Boy, or more likely it's Nanu, but for any basic Pokemon, but it's pretty much like Ninja Boy, but from the discard instead of the deck, which is really cool. This does see play. It is useful for V-Star stuff. You can turn either a support Pokemon or say a Comfey or something that's used its ability, done all what it needs to do, and you can turn it into a Pokemon V, and assuming that you played this basic down last turn, that's the whole reason you would do this stuff, you can then evolve the Pokemon V immediately into the V-Star, and it's really, really cool. Obviously you could use this in other decks that play like Red Candies and stuff too, but those aren't very common, so yeah, pretty cool card though. Volo is a very interesting card that very occasionally sees play in V-focused decks. Discard one of your bench Pokemon V and all cards attached to it. Kind of like Giovanni's Exile, but with no stipulation that it has to be undamaged, which is pretty cool. It's fine. This could be useful to get rid of a Crobat that you had to draw with early in the game, maybe a Luminion that you searched with to get your opening supporter that you needed, but then you don't want it on field later on, so you could use Volo for that. Maybe combined with Collapse Stadium if you had to play multiple of these sorts of cards. I don't know. It's a neat card. Doesn't really see a ton of play, but it does see a little bit of play, ironically, in Arceus decks, I think. So, very funny considering what he is, right? What he's like. Lake Acuity, this probably should have been an honorable mention, but it's okay, I suppose. Did see some play in a couple of Goodra decks. Any Pokemon that has a water or a fighting energy attached takes 20 less from attacks from their opponent's Pokemon. So, it's a passive stadium, doesn't really do a lot as a result, but sometimes this sort of effect will stick and it will be the deciding factor. I think I'd rather have Crystal Cave though, for Goodra, and I don't really see this being useful in Palkia or anything, to be honest, so yeah, kinda sucks, I suppose. Lost City, on the other hand, is anything but. If Pokemon gets knocked out, by any means, not just by damage from an attack, put that Pokemon into the Lost Zone instead of a discard pile. You discard all the attached cards so you don't get to Lost Zone all of their energy or something as well, that would be busted, but this is incredible against single prize decks in particular, but any deck that has a sensitive card that they are revolving around is going to get wrecked by this. If you saw anything about that Inteleon Radiant Charizard deck that I tried to play against Stonejourner in the last round, if you Lost Zone the Radiant Charizard, that deck is in so much trouble. So this card is pretty devastating. It can be a little bit double-edged against Lost Box decks until they have their full setup, but a lot of Lost Box decks actually also rely on having low counts of their attackers, so can also get very disturbed by this as well. Super strong card. A lot of decks will play this, everything from Mew to like some Arceus builds will play it. Against like my Kyurem deck actually this round plays it, we'll talk about that in a bit. Very cool card. Also, very irritating against the Regis. That's the other one it's super good against. Speaking of counter-based cards, this is for an archetype we don't have yet, that this counters. So not going to see play immediately, but Box of Disaster is our like one tool card in the set. If the Pokemon V this is attached to has full HP and gets KO'd by damage from an attack on the opponent's side, put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So the idea is that this actually got teched against Gardevoir EX when the Scarlet Violet set came out, because you could basically knock them out because they have to put damage counters on the thing they're accelerating to, and usually have to put a lot of damage counters down, so they only have like 20 HP left or something, and this will just KO them. So yeah, pretty annoying card to be honest with you. There are a couple other tools in this set, but they're not even worth an honorable mention, really, they're that bad, so yeah. The one special energy that we have here is Gift Energy. Anyone from PTCGO land will know that this was bugged for months, and basically stopped Regis from being a viable deck on the ladder, which was a real shame because it actually saw tournament success because of this card. I think Azul's group actually didn't win, but went like 3 in top 8 of Salt Lake, I think it was. One of the tournaments around that sort of bit. Very powerful. If this is attached to the Pokemon that gets KO'd by damage from the opponent's attack, you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. So single prize decks love this thing, and the Regis loved it in particular because most of their attacks had a colorless in their cost. Think Regirock is 2 fighting and a colorless. I think all of them actually have got that sort of stipulation. Even Regidrago is grass, fire, colorless, on the main one anyway. So if you accelerated Gift Energy with the Regigigas, that meant that even if the opponent hand disrupted you, you would still draw until you had 7 cards at the end of the turn. So Roxanne didn't do much, the Marnies and stuff were much weaker against you, and it just helped you recover so much better. Super strong card there. Did see some experimentation elsewhere. I'm pretty sure Lugia ends up playing this at times, because the card is just very nice to keep up your advantage with. So yeah, pretty cool. On to the Pokemon that we haven't yet mentioned through the rest of this. Pidgeot V is like an anti-stall card. Sometimes I think control decks actually play this as well, so they do go like infinite. Usually the stall deck itself as well. It's a very weird card. It's basically only used for the ability, where once during your turn, if it's on the bench, shuffle it and all cards attached to it into the deck. This got used alongside, again, one of the biggest tool cards in the next set, that with the Rotom V as well. We will talk about that Sealstone when we get there, but mostly it was used because it was a Pokemon V, and also because it let you never deck out. So if the opponent didn't have something like this as well, the game would always end in your favor if they couldn't make any good moves. Aerodactyl V-Star is pretty solid. We're not going to talk about the V because it sucks, sorry. 260 HP on the frail side for a V-Star, with 2 retreat as well is kind of annoying. Its attack is fine. You might charge this up in Arceus decks because they do tend to play like the double turbo and stuff, right? Fighting 2 colorless energy 240, put the top 3 cards of your own deck into the Lost Zone. Bit of an expensive finishing bit there, but it did see attacking play sometimes because that attack does a lot of damage, right? And 240 is enough to KO any basic Pokemon V, so that's pretty good. But it's really here for the V-Star power. Ancient Star for a single colorless energy is an attack that lets you give the Aerodactyl V-Star an ability so long as it is in play. That ability will prevent the opponent's Pokemon V from having abilities. So this lets you, if you do it quick enough, stop the opponent from using Palkia or Arceus, those are the main 2, but it would also stop Goodra, which is something we'll see in a bit as well. Very irritating card. Arceus piles did tend to use it a bit because it's got the fighting weakness side of it as well. Snorlax is very good. Don't ask me how that bridge is holding up, by the way, because it's just a little wooden bridge and he's a 1,000-pound dude. Don't know how he's not like breaking that bridge, but hey, Pokemon logic, am I right? 150 HP single prizer on the bulky side for a basic, that's really good. Its ability prevents all effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. Fantastic against Sableye, so this is really good in Lost Box against other Lost Box decks. The reason is for any 3 colorless energy, Thumping Snore does 180 damage, which is enough to KO any single prizer that you're going to go against. Very good. The catch is that you're asleep after using it, and you have to flip 2 heads instead of 1 to wake up. But that is barely an inconvenience in a deck that plays between 8 and 12 cards that will push you out the active anyway. This is an absurd card and very, very powerful. I'm going to be trying to fit one of these into the Lost Box decks. The Lost Box deck I'm going to be playing against the guys because it is just very powerful in the mirror. And even against like multi-prize stuff, this is really good for cleaning up after one of the other Pokemon that be dealing. It's good for cleaning up after Sableye too, right? You can put damage counters down so that 180 is enough to get the KOs you need, and yeah, just a really strong card. Radiant Gardevoir is fantastic for Arceus decks that didn't really want to play Greninja, and Charizard wasn't doing it for them because they weren't playing Fire. It's a 130 HP Radiant Pokemon, just like the Greninja, and if it's in play, your Pokemon take 20 less damage from the opponent's Pokemon V. Pretty straightforward, but 20 less damage is enough to fix a lot of math, so it's really good. Attack is unfortunately very bad because the energy cost is way too high, and it doesn't do that much anyway. You probably would have to double turbo this because it's not a Pokemon Arceus can accelerate to, and that effectively makes it useless, so yeah, too bad. Still a very strong card though, for another good Gardevoir representation. Go figure, right? TCG loves its Gardevoir cards. Also sometimes likes Mawile, and this is a really good one. It was played, I think, mostly as tech against decks later on that were very light on their switching cards. Like Lost Box has got a ton of them, but a lot of the evolution decks especially can't really fit that many switch cards in, and Tempting Trap is a trap attack, obviously. It prevents the opponent from retreating for 1 colorless energy, and it doesn't do any damage, which means that kind of like Block Snorlax, you can just lock the opponent in with this, and if they can't attack with a Pokemon that they have, or they can't play a switch card, they're cooked. That's just it. It does have an extra effect on here as well. The defending Pokemon takes 90 more damage during your next turn, but you very rarely actually follow up with an attack on the same Pokemon, and even if you do, it might have just been like, you know, too bulky anyway, so kind of whatever. It's levelable searchable too, so that can matter in certain decks too. Very good card. Bayonet, I think, was a little bit underplayed, but there were a couple of Lost Box decks that played this. It's 100 HP, irritatingly, which means it can't be levelable searched. That's maybe one of the big downsides to it, to be honest. But Puppet Offering, for nothing, because it's an ability, lets you Lost Zone the Bayonet, discarding all the cards attached to it. So you put 2 cards in the Lost Zone, and your reward for that is taking a supporter card from your discard pile and putting it into the hand. So you can reuse supporter cards. It's Versus Seeker. It's really good, right? For now, we do have Evolution Incense that you could play with this, but that's a little bit clunky to play in a Lost Box deck, so I can kind of see why it wasn't played that much there. I think this could have been pretty reasonable in like Giratina style decks though, as a thing. It did see a little bit of success here and there. It wasn't like completely out of the meta, but I do think this card was underrepresented. And honestly, if we were playing at the time, especially during like the Silver Tempest format, which was a notoriously long format we'll get into next time, we could have had experimentation with this. I think we would have played it at least once. It's a pretty good card. Drapion V is another check to Mew decks. This is another one that kind of forces them to start playing Path to the Peak in order to get around this thing as one of their stadium cards. It's a 210 HP Dart type. It hits for 190 damage, so it automatically KOs Mew VMAX. That's the idea. It does take 4 colors to do that, and does 60 to one of your own Pokemon. So you'd think, why are we even using this? Well, its ability makes that attack cost 1 colorless less for each style Pokemon the opponent has in play. Wild Style on this guy works on single, rapid, and fusion strike Pokemon. So it can be used against Urshifu as well if you do come across that. But for the most part, it is being used specifically because Mew only plays fusion strike cards. So they bench 4 Pokemon, this attack costs 0, KOs the Mew. And you're trading 2 prizes for 3 prizes at that point, because they're gonna KO you back, but you don't really care because you've gone 3 prizes up on them. Very, very good card, and this was always the thing of, do you play the Drapion in your Drapion in the deck? That was always the question that had to come up in tournament stuff. Very often it turned out that the EU did play it, but still got beat by Mew anyway, because the Mew players over here were just cracked. That just is how it is. Lost City is another really good card to use against this, because you only ever play one. You're never going to play multiple copies of this unless you are desperate. And this is, yeah, it's like, if it goes away, then you're not really doing very well, are you? So yeah. Cresselia is a future card. This 120 HP single prizer is used in Gardevoir EX decks, or at least it was before it rotated. Yeah, it's about to anyway, isn't it? Moonglow Reverse moves 2 damage counters from each of your Pokemon to one of the opponent's Pokemon for a single Psychic Energy, which is rather powerful, as you can imagine. In a deck which accelerates a ton of energy and then puts damage counters on the Pokemon it accelerates to, you can easily justify putting like 1 energy on about 4 different Pokemon and then shifting that damage from all of those Pokemon to one thing that you can just KO. Very interesting card, very good single price piece in that deck, and yeah, nice stuff. Let's talk about Kyurem, because this card, or Kyurem, however you want to say it, this card is pretty bonkers. It's a 220 HP Metal Weak Water type, very good for the Palkia deck because their Lightning weakness is usually a disadvantage. It evolves into a 330 HP VMAX. Both of them have got a free energy retreat, so shame we don't have regular Heavy Ball anymore, but whatever. Rapid Freeze is a very interesting first attack, and is the reason why we're still talking about the regular V here as well. 1 water energy, attach any number of waters from your hand to your Pokemon in any way that you like. With Capacious Bucket still being in play, there is the possibility that this could accelerate like 3 energy into play or something, which is a really good attack to have. Just a nice way of building up to the Max Frost attack that we have on the VMAX. This is pretty beastly, to be honest. 330 HP is no longer the sort of benchmark that people are trying to hit, because it is a very difficult benchmark to hit, and most decks cap out at 280, so why bother trying to hit the higher number, right? For free water energy, you do 120 damage, but if you discard water energy from play, then, specifically from this Pokemon, you can do 50 more for each one discarded. So you are going to have to put a bunch of energy on this guy, but if you discard 3 with a choice belt, you do 300. So the numbers are kind of awkward. They are like 10 short of where I would want them to be. I would have loved this to have been 130 plus, that would have made it so much easier. But discard 4 energy from this thing, do 320, that KOs basically everything. So it's not bad. You might wonder how we're getting that sort of energy in play though, especially with Frostmoth kind of being a bit weird with it. The main ways are its ability and with Palkia. Glaciated World lets you look at the top card of your deck, or discard it I should say, and if it's a water energy you attach it to one of your Pokemon. This is a soft once per turn, so per Kyurem VMAX that you have. I think it is supposed to be Kyurem, but I don't know, it's a very annoying way of saying it. Yeah, if you can discard energy from the top of the deck, it's very much like the Macargo that we used to have. I think it was the EX that did that. And just like that Macargo, we have a way of stacking the top of our deck at the moment, or two ways I should say, but one of them is bad at the moment. Oranguru is the big one, because we get to take a card from our hand, which would be a water energy, put it on top of the deck, and then discard it with this and accelerate. It's very good. Also, the Palkia is another really good way of using this once per game as well. Being able to accelerate up to 3 water energy from the discard pile to this, pretty strong. Melanie can also accelerate in energy as well, so there's plenty of ways of getting the big attack that you need, and yeah, it's really good at scoring one-shots, which is something that outside of Giratina is a little bit difficult to do in a lot of games, and even then Giratina can still struggle sometimes as well, depending on who it's up against. Delphox is a little bit of a surprising one to see in the meta pile, but it did actually see some success from time to time. I think mostly with Arceus, but you could probably play this in Lost Box too if you've got a fire slot. For 2 fire and a colorless, you do 120 damage with magical fire. You do have to put 2 energy attached to it into the Lost Zone, which sounds like terrible, right? Why are we using a Pokemon V to do that? Well, it's because you also do 120 damage to one of the opponent's bench as well for doing this attack, and that is insane. We're not going to see it off of this because Raikou is still available, the amazing rare one, but yeah, if you remember that from, what was it, Battle Styles I think is when I had that deck saved. The amazing rare Raikou was powered up by Paragon Z before, now we power it up with Mirage Gate. The amazing rare stuff is super good at that, and it has this attack, and we played with this before. If you don't have Manaphy down, this type of attack will absolutely decimate you. And just like the Greninja example of Radiant Greninja, you could bench this, attach a fire to it, you could even Magma Basin if you're playing that style of thing here, to get 1 energy onto it, and then use Mirage Gate to get the other 2 that we have here. You don't have to Lost Zone fire energy in particular, so you could Lost Zone the other energy here as well, and yeah, this attack is really, really strong. I think the main home that it had was Arceus, but you could absolutely do some fun stuff with that. Finally, we do have Hisui and Gudra from the meta pile over here. This is a 270 HP V-Star, slightly frailer, but it doesn't have a weakness, so there is that going for it. We're not going to talk about it basic because it's not particularly good, but it has a very similar attack to the Rolling Iron over here. For 1 water, 1 metal, and 1 colorless, you do 200 damage, and during your next turn, you take 80 less damage from the opponent's attacks, which is pretty good. It says after applying weakness and resistance, but you ain't got no weakness, so heck yeah. Its V-Star power allows you to full heal the Gudra once per game. If you don't have to use Arceus to set up, this is a fantastic V-Star power to have, because usually you're effectively at 350 HP with this thing. That is monstrously difficult to kill in one go, right? So the idea is that you're doing 200 a turn, that's 2-shotting everything, or 1-shotting frailer stuff, and you're taking so much less damage that you might even survive 2 attacks, and then you can do the V-Star power and it's your opponent is just miserable. So yeah, very fun. We do have a few off-meta cards to talk about here, so let's go through these somewhat quickly. Clefairy is a fun one. I think people tried to use this instead of the Lunatone Solrock. People tried to use this with Mewtwo V-Star. Didn't really go anywhere, but whatever. If the Clefairy is active as a soft once per turn, you can accelerate a Psychic Energy from your deck to each of your benched Clefairy. So you could then swap stuff around, it'd be pretty fun. It actually has an attack that you would end up using as well. Wonderstorm for 3 colors energy does 20 for each psychic energy that you have on all of your Pokemon. So it can actually do a ton of damage by itself too, because it's each one of these Clefairy is accelerating 3 energy. If you can play enough Switch and Escape Rope to get a bunch of the Clefairies active in a turn, that's suddenly swinging for unbelievable amounts of damage. Problem is all the energy is from the deck, which is kind of rough. You would ideally want it from the discard pile, but yeah, it's pretty funny. Arcanine is potentially a deck that Pepper's going to end up playing, because I did show him it, and whilst we got a bit unlucky with it, we were pretty close to winning with that one against Lost Box, so we might well bring this. For 0 energy, you do 10 damage, but you do 150 more if you have no cards in your hand. It's very much Grand Ball, but without an energy cost this time. This pairs with Hisui, the not Hisuian Zohorak, the Phantom Transformation one, in order to have a steady stream of attackers that you can use every turn with it. The Zoroark can then also provide a little bit of extra utility by bringing back other stage 1s from the discard as well, which is pretty cool. So you could use Mighty Anna to counter Mew, for example, which would otherwise be very difficult for this fighting type to deal with. It is fighting type, so it can KO Arceus in one hit, which is pretty good. And the fact that it's an evolution means it doesn't worry about Flying Pikachu's ability, at least. And you are a single prizer, so you are able to dictate the way the prize trade goes in your favor. The Growlithe has got like 80 or 90 HP depending on which one you play, so it's not vulnerable to Sableye pings that much. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Magnezone, I've been told, did see a little bit of play in some early Miraidon decks, so I guess we'll talk about it. I think the V is like kind of cool because Splitting Beam is interesting. For a Lightning double colorless, it does 90 and 30 to 2 of the opponent's bench. It's not super strong for the cost, but spread damage is always good, so that's kind of neat. And this Magnetic Grip over here, I wanted to say Circuit, but that's a completely different ability. Same energy cost, 180 damage this time, and you search your deck for up to 2 items and put them into the hand. Pretty cool. Electro Star gives you a V-Star power in Miraidon, and for 2 lightning energy it does 90 to 2 of the opponent's bench as an attack. That's fine enough. Interesting card. Radiant Sneasler is pretty cool. This lets you put 2 extra poison damage, like 2 extra poison damage counters down basically. So if your opponent is regular poison, they'll take 30 instead of 10. We can stack this with stuff like the regular Sneasler and the Butterfree deck from before, where you now do an extra 20 to make up the numbers that you need on like V-Stars and whatnot. So you do 240 plus 30 from the poison plus 20 from the burn, 290 KOs everything. It's pretty fun. Deck is still not very good, but at least it's got kill power now, so that's something. Deoxys gets a VMAX and a V-Star here, just like I mentioned from the promo section. Both are, I think, kind of worth mentioning here because I think the VMAX did see some play, even though I think it's the worst one overall, mostly because it messes with numbers. Protective DNA for each Deoxys VMAX you have in play makes your Pokemon take 30 less damage from V-Stars specifically. So this actually can stack well in an Arceus deck to prevent the opponent from being able to KO you with stuff like Giratina. And yeah, I think Giratina is still 2 shots no matter how many of these you have in play, and its attack is like only barely passable. 160 for Psychic double colorless is just not very strong. So it bare minimum 2 shots the V-Stars, so I guess you've got that. And it does heal a little bit, but that healing is so bleh that it's not really a thing for me. I like the V-Star a bit more personally. It's only 270 HP, but that's fine enough. Psychic Javelin is just a really strong attack. 2 Psychic in the colors, 190, and do 60 to 1 of the opponent's bench Pokemon V. Pretty good. Star Force, I don't think I've ever read this attack, I'll be completely honest with you. For 1 Psychic, it does 60 for each energy attached to both active Pokemon, so it's like a super X-Ball, which is okay, I suppose. You're more than likely going to be using Arceus' V-Star power, because that's what you're going to pair this with. But I guess if you haven't yet, that's a good one-shot style attack to have around. So yeah, I like it. I think it's a good card, but you know, probably not going to go out of my way to build an Arceus deck with it. That's kind of the thing, right? There's just too many things that card can do, and I just don't really want to build that one. Spiritom's a fun card. It's a 60 HP single prizer that if it gets KO'd, then buy damage from an opponent's attack, specifically, so it doesn't work against Lost Box. That's the big problem with this deck. You do get to search your deck for a card, so That's kind of cool. Doesn't even have to be active when it gets KO'd, so if it gets hit on the bench, you still get to search for a card. The actual attack is pretty solid. For 2 Dark Energy, it does 10 plus 60 for each Spiritomb that's in your discard pile. So on a full discard of 3 Spiritomb and this one attacking, it is 190 damage, which is respectable for a single prizer that can be Dark Patched to, so that's pretty good. However, it is a single prize basic Pokemon, which means that Ditto from Pokemon Go can copy this attack, and that lets you have a 4th Spiritomb in the discard pile. At that point, it's doing 250, which with a Choice Belt is enough to KO Pokemon V-Star. 280 is the chase number, and it can actually hit it, which is pretty respectable. The only catch is the 2 energy requirement, but Raihan is really good at solving that problem. So this deck's actually something to be considered. It's I don't think it saw tournament success in real tournaments anyway, and online tournaments I think it was okay, but at least I've heard of it that way. Very cool deck though. I think Mahone's got a really good video on this one, so yeah. Hisuian Basculegion, the main reason to note this is because the Basculin that came out before lets you like bench 2 Pokemon out of your deck for 0 energy. This for 0 energy, as its evolution, does 20 for each basic energy in your discard, and then you shuffle those cards into the deck. So it's like the Volcarona V from before, but it's on a single prize stage 1 instead of a multi-prize basic. Still pretty good. Doesn't take any energy to do that either, so you can avoid having to attach to it, which is nice. So yeah, there's a silly deck or two that you could use it with, so that's why we're noting it. Finally, there's Trevenant. I don't remember this being anything in real life either, but it is a fun card anyway, and it's a bit better than an honorable mention. If it's knocked out by damage from an opponent's Pokemon V, they can't take any prizes for it, so it can be used in a pretty stally sort of fashion, especially with stuff like Clara can get it back. Its attack is very difficult to power up, and against single prize decks it really doesn't do much. For 2 grass and a colorless it does 150, but it can't attack in consecutive turns. That's fine, it's going to get KO'd anyway, so nobody really cares. But the idea is that it can be very good against things like Arceus and Giratina and whatnot, where they just can never actually take prizes against it, and you can stall for quite a few turns. Very good with hit and run attacks actually, because you probably are never powering this up to attack. Finally, we have honorable mentions down here. I think maybe only one of these is actually competitively viable, and even then probably kind of just lame, but whatever. These are the interesting cards that you might want to build around in the set. Let's just quickly go over them. Raichu over here is for Ace Spark. It's for Lightning Double Colorless. It does 100 plus 120 more if you've used your V-Star power this game. Problem is it's not a Pokemon V, so it's really hard to accelerate to, and we don't yet have electromagnetic, what's the thing, Electrocharger from Scarlet Violet that would accelerate to this. Even if you did, you wouldn't use it, so yeah. In theory it should have worked with Arceus, but it doesn't because Arceus is dumb and cannot attach to non-V Pokemon. Politoed for 2 colorless energy does up to 280 damage. It's 10 plus 60 if you've got a Poliwag on the bench, plus 90 if you've got a Poliwhirl on the bench, and plus 120 if there's a Poliwrath on the bench. The Poliwrath itself is fighting type that uses water energy and can do 160 damage, so it is capable of one-shotting Arceus. That's like the only reason to even consider it, but again it's just so expensive to get that attack going, and if you double turbo this like you would probably have to, because you're likely playing twin and double turbo, half the time this is only going to do 260, and that's if you've got your board meticulously set up. Maybe if there was like a single or a rapid strike Politoed or Poliwrath line that we could use this with, have to be the Poliwrath, right? But if there was a single or rapid strike version that we could use the mustards with, maybe you could justify it. But we have tried this sort of thing before, this whole Frog Song sort of deck. It is just really bad, and nowadays it's going to be even harder to use, so yeah. Machamp is funny. If the opponent's got 3 or fewer prizes left, this is a 300 HP single prizer that can do 200 damage for 2 fighting energy as well. Can't do that in consecutive turns, who cares, it can switch out and do all the fun stuff that way. Fighting's a good type to have, but it's a Psychic Weak stage 2 that takes 2 energy, so that should tell you how good this card is. Radiant Steelix, welcome back, Shining Gyarados. This is the funny meme haha card. If you discard all but one card in your deck for 2 metal and a colorless, you do 60 plus 30 for each energy card you discarded in that way. Very stupid card. It is just a reprint of the old Gyarados, and it's just as bad as that Gyarados, but it is a 170 HP basic, so that's pretty funny in its own right. Maybe if you could use this with like Thornton, and use the first attack, and not get KO because you got a lot of HP, maybe then, but otherwise, heck no. Hisuian Electrode is got a couple of support cards here actually. For 0 energy, I don't remember if this was in the previous set, it might have been a promo, I don't remember if I talked about it, so it's got the full art in this set, let's just talk about it here. For no energy, it does 100 damage for each special condition that's on this Pokemon. How are we getting special conditions on ourselves? Well, one is Spicy Season Curry, that can burn yourself and then heal 40. The other, at the moment, is the Parasect in this set. If you evolve into Parasect, you make both active Pokemon asleep and poisoned. How do you attack when you're asleep? That's not normally something you can do. The tool card Wind-Up Arm lets you do exactly that. It does not let you retreat, but it does let you attack if you are asleep or paralyzed. So the idea is you get at least 2 special conditions, but you can burn yourself to get the third one, and then you do 300 damage for no energy. Not particularly good in the sense, but it does KO things, and that is very silly. Did see a little bit of play alongside Cloth when that was a thing for a while, because this guy lets you hit Grass Weakness and KO Charizard. That was the idea. Very stupid. Kingdra is kind of neat. It lets you choose one player and that player shuffle draws. It actually is not shuffle draw, it's Marnie. You put their hand to the bottom of the deck and draw 4 cards. In theory, kind of decent because you can hand disrupt the opponent every turn, but it's on stage 2, so nobody's going to play it. Real shame, because I think this card could have actually been kind of good. Even the Self Marnie could actually work in the right circumstance, so a bit disappointed it's not good, but it's a stage 2, what are you going to do, right? It's not named Inteleon, not good. Cleavor V-Star evolves from the Cleavor V that was in the previous set. That Cleavor V wasn't very good. The V-Star doesn't do enough damage, I'm afraid to report. For fighting in the colors, it does 120 and 60 to one of the opponent's bench. So bench Pokemon V specifically, so it's basically a weaker version of the Deoxys V-Star, but it does take 1 less energy. With a Choice Belt, it could KO Arceus, but that's really reaching, unfortunately. Rampaging Star, as its V-Star power, for 1 fighting energy, does 30 for each Pokemon in your discard pile. So you could do some fun stuff with it, but it's really just not capable. Just like the Ariados over here, the damage numbers are just not there. For 1 Darkness Energy, this Level Ball Searchable Stage 1 does 10 plus 30 for each colorless energy in the opponent's active retreat cost. You want to know the sad thing about this? Mew does not have a retreat cost, and therefore takes 10 damage from this, which means it's a dark Pokemon that can't counter Mew. Next please. Beautifly lets you draw until you have 6 cards in your hand once per turn. I have used this in the past with Delphox, but the catch is, Delphox actually did stuff. This doesn't have an attack that's playable, so pass, basically. We have Bibarel that does 1 card less, but it's also 1 evolution stage lower, so it's so much easier to play. So, yeah. Electric and Electros are emulating Fates Collide Superior, where when you evolve into the Electric, you flip for Paralysis, and the Electros does 10 damage for 1 energy, but does 120 more during the opponent's next turn. Extreme Current, for its credit, does 160 for 2 energy. You discard 2 energy, but like Lightning colorless. But that's 160 plus the 120 would get the KO on V-Stars and whatnot. The catch is that you're a 160 HP Pokemon. You are going to get KO'd before you can even take advantage of that. So yeah, it's a stage 2 that does 10 damage. Next, Hisuian Goodra was almost cool, even though it was a stage 2. This prevents all damage done to each of your basic Pokemon that have Metal Energy attached to them by the opponent's Pokemon V. If this didn't say basic, we would actually be in business with this, and I think this would have been pretty disruptive too. But the fact of it only works on basic Pokemon means you can't use it on V-Stars and whatnot, and you also can't even use it on itself, which means it just gets gusted and KO'd, and then you're vulnerable again. And you've played a stage 2 to do that. Next! Mimikyu for a Psychic and a Colorless does 10 for each damage counter that's on all of the opponent's Pokemon. Just a bit too expensive to charge, unfortunately. If it was for Twin Energy, then we'd probably be okay with this, because then you could build a spread deck around it, but unfortunately it's not, so yeah. It's too bad, but I just can't really see this being played. Zeraora VMAX, there is a V-Star as well, but I don't even think it's worth an honorable mention, it's that bad. This is mostly being talked on because it is a decent enough attacker. For 2 Lightning Energy, this does 60 for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play with an ability, so it's pretty solid. It's like the Lopunny Jigglypuff style thing, but ability is something which every deck is generally going to play into at the moment. Even, like, think Mew has got a bunch of Genesect in play, so you do a decent amount of damage with that too. Max Fist for 1 extra colorless energy does a flat 240, and you discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. So you don't even get locked out of using Reactive Pulse next turn. It's okay. The problem is that it's a fighting weak Pokemon that does not have Dunsparce access, so it is unfortunately just a little bit too vulnerable to counterpicking in the metagame. Stonjourner is the only one I think that could have maybe seen play, but I think the Lugia decks were focused on the single strike one at the time, but maybe in non-single strike ones you could do something with this. For a fighting and 3 colorless energy, this 140 HP fighting type basic does 120 damage and puts the top card of the opponent's deck into the lost zone. I think it's the only other card in this set that puts opponent's cards into lost zone instead of your own. Unfortunately, that attack is just way too expensive. If you're paying this with double turbo, then it doesn't even do anywhere near enough damage, and 120 is okay with a choice belt if you hit the weakness, but it doesn't even KO like the VMAX stuff here, so yeah, just a bit too weak. And then I think the last card that I wanted to touch on is Spectria. Probably could have put this next to Mimikyu, to be honest, because the two would go together. For a single Psychic Energy, this 120 HP so Ghost type basically does 2 damage counters to 2 of the opponent's Pokemon. It would have been okay in probably the start of Gen 7 or something maybe, because I did play similar-ish attacks at the end of Gen 6. There was a Mimikyu at the end of Gen 7 that had an attack like this, but it also had a really good support attack to start with discarding supporter cards and whatnot, so that was much better. This guy just gets outclassed by Sableye. Why put 2 damage counters on 2 different Pokemon if you could put 12 damage counters for the same amount of energy? Just doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, that is Lost Impact in general. Very good set, very lengthy one to speak on for sure. Yeah, this set is fun. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. It's just one of those sets that actually makes you rethink how you play the game a fair bit, especially because of this engine here. This recontextualized a lot of stuff within the game and made it very interesting to play around. So enjoy watching that next time, and until then, thank you for watching and take care.